Have you ever been the one everyone depends on? The quiet one, the responsible one, the person whose own dreams are always seen as less important than the family's immediate needs. You work hard, you save your money, you build a small corner of the world for yourself, only to find that the people you love most don't see it as your home, but as their safety net. This is the story of Liam, a man who learned the hard way that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to teach them where your front door is. It all started, as these things often do, with a joke. A casual, thoughtless comment thrown across a dinner table, laden with years of unspoken assumptions. The air in his parents' house was thick with the smell of roast chicken and the weight of expectation. Liam sat quietly, his calloused hands resting on his knees, a silent testament to the long hours he spent at the carpentry workshop. His father, a man whose laughter always seemed to be at someone else's expense, raised his glass. "Well, Chloe," he'd boomed, looking at Liam's younger sister, "if this new marketing gig doesn't pan out, you can always just move in with your big brother. He's got that spare room just collecting dust." His mother chimed in with a light, airy laugh. "That's a wonderful idea. Liam wouldn't mind, would you, honey?" Family helps family. Liam felt a familiar tightening in his chest. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. His sister, Chloe, simply smiled, a flick of her eyes in his direction that felt less like a plea and more like an appraisal. She saw the house he'd bought, the walls he'd painted, the garden he'd painstakingly cultivated, not as his accomplishment, but as her potential future address. Liam offered a weak, noncommittal smile, the same one he'd used for years to avoid conflict. He thought, foolishly, that if he didn't engage, the idea would wither and die. He didn't understand that their silence was his consent. He drove home that night to his small, perfect house, the one he'd poured every spare dollar and every weekend into, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The joke echoed in the quiet rooms, a premonition of a battle he hadn't realized was already being waged against his own autonomy. He had spent his life being the reliable son, the sturdy branch for everyone else to lean on. He was about to find out just how much weight that branch was expected to bear before it finally, catastrophically, snapped. The next day, the premonition became a nightmare. Liam pulled his truck into the driveway after a grueling 10-hour shift, his body aching for the simple comfort of his own space. He dreamt of a hot shower, a quiet meal, and the peace he had worked so hard to build. But as he approached the front door, his key felt foreign in the lock. It wouldn't turn. A jolt of confusion, then annoyance, shot through him. He tried again, jiggling it, pushing against the solid wood he himself had installed. Nothing. A cold dread began to pool in his stomach as he noticed the faint, fresh scratches around the keyhole. It was a new lock. Panic gave way to a surge of anger. He pounded on the door, his voice hoarse. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" The door swung open, not with the urgency of a stranger, but with the casual entitlement of an invited guest. His sister, Chloe, stood there in her pajamas, a half-eaten bowl of cereal in her hand. Her expression wasn't one of apology or surprise, it was one of mild annoyance at being interrupted. Behind her, in his hallway, were her boxes, a mountain of cardboard and chaos that violated the neat, orderly sanctuary he had created. "Liam, you're so loud," she said, taking another bite. "What's going on?" Liam's voice was dangerously low. "What are you doing here, Chloe? Why are my locks changed?" She rolled her eyes, a gesture he'd seen 1,000 times, one that always dismissed his feelings as an overreaction. "Oh, that. Mom and Dad gave me the money for a locksmith. They said it was for the best, you know, so I could have my own key and feel secure. We're family, Liam." It's not a big deal. The words "we're family" were not a term of endearment, they were a weapon, a justification for the ultimate act of trespass. He looked past her, at her life spilling into his, at the silent, smiling photos of his parents on his mantelpiece that now seemed to mock him. He was no longer the owner of his home, he was its unwilling custodian. The foundation of his world had been ripped out from under him, not by a stranger, but by the very people he was supposed to trust most. The phone call to his parents was a vortex of disbelief and fury. Liam stood on his own lawn, locked out of his own life, listening to the calm, reasonable tones of his mother's voice as she explained the unforgivable. "Liam, don't be so dramatic," she began, her go-to phrase for invalidating his emotions. "Chloe needed a place to stay. You have the space." It's that simple. Liam's hand, still covered in sawdust from work, clenched the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Simple? You changed the locks on my house, Mom. You gave her permission to invade my life without even asking me." There was a sigh on the other end, the weary sigh of a parent dealing with a difficult child. His father took the phone. "Listen, son," his voice was firm, laced with disappointment. "Your sister was struggling. We helped you with the down payment on that house, remember? We see it as a family asset. It's your duty to help your sister. A good brother would be happy to do it." The mention of the down payment was a knife twist. It was a loan, one he had been meticulously repaying every month for 5 years, with interest. He had the records, the bank statements, the cancelled checks to prove it. But in their narrative, it was a gift that came with strings, an investment that gave them ownership not just of the property, but of him. That was a loan, and you know it, Liam choked out, the injustice of it all stealing his breath. "This is my home. I paid for it. I work for it." His mother's voice returned, softer now, but more manipulative. "We just thought you'd want to help. We raised you to be a good man, Liam. A generous man. Don't let all this success make you selfish. What will people think?" The conversation ended not with a resolution, but with an ultimatum veiled in concern. He was being painted as the villain, the cold-hearted brother, the ungrateful son. They had rewritten reality to suit their needs, and in their story, his boundaries were a moral failing. He hung up the phone, the silence of his own yard deafening. He was alone, truly alone, standing outside the life he had built, a stranger to his own family. The choice before him was stark: surrender his life to their demands or fight for it. For the first time, the quiet, responsible son decided he had been quiet for long enough. The first few days were a blur of helpless rage. Liam slept in his truck, the cramped space a constant, physical reminder of his displacement. He'd wake up stiff and cold, staring at the silhouette of his own house against the morning sky, a house where lights turned on and off, where life went on without him. He showered at the local gym, ate cheap takeout, and went to work like a ghost, his colleagues noticing his haggard appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. He felt a profound sense of shame, as if their violation was somehow his fault. He had tried reasoning one more time, leaving a note on the door, pleading with Chloe to just talk to him. Her response was a text message: "Mom says you're being really immature about this. Just give it a week and you'll cool down." He realized then that reason was a language his family no longer spoke. They only understood power and control. That realization led him to a place he never imagined he'd be, the waiting room of a legal aid clinic. The room was drab, filled with people whose faces held the same weary desperation he felt. When his name was called, he was led into a small, cluttered office to meet Ms. Albright. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the sawdust on his shirt and the exhaustion in his posture. She was professional, almost clinical, as she took out a notepad. "Please, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice even. Start from the beginning. Liam had expected to feel embarrassed, to stammer through his story about a family squabble. But as he spoke, something shifted. He wasn't just complaining, he was presenting a case. He laid it all out: the joker at dinner, the changed locks, the phone call with his parents. Then, he opened his worn backpack and began placing documents on her desk. The mortgage agreement, with only his name on it. The loan repayment schedule he'd created for his parents, with every single payment checked off. Bank statements showing the direct deposits. Receipts for the new roof, the water heater, the windows, all paid for from his account. He even had photos on his phone, before and after shots of the renovations he'd done with his own 2 hands. He was building not just a home, but a fortress of facts. Ms. Albright had started the meeting with the detached air of a busy public defender dealing with another domestic dispute. But as Liam talked and the pile of evidence grew, her expression changed. Her professional mask slowly dissolved, replaced by a focused intensity, and then, a flicker of something else, indignation. She wasn't just looking at a client anymore. She was looking at a good man, a hard-working man, who had been systematically exploited by the people who should have been his greatest protectors. She saw the quiet dignity in the way he presented his meticulous records, the profound hurt in his voice when he spoke of his sister's betrayal. She stopped taking notes and simply listened, her pen resting on the pad. The legal facts were clear, but it was the human story, the story of the overlooked virtuoso, the hidden gem whose value was only seen in terms of what he could provide, that truly captured her. When Liam finally finished, a heavy silence filled the small office. Ms. Albright looked from the pile of documents to Liam's earnest, tired face. "Mr. Henderson," she said, and her voice was different now, infused with a firm, protective warmth. "They haven't just broken the law. They've broken a covenant. And we are going to fix this." In that moment, Liam felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. He had found an ally, a catalyst who saw not just his problem, but his worth. The fight was far from over, but he was no longer fighting it alone. Ms. Albright was a woman of action. She didn't waste time with gentle persuasion or hopeful negotiations. She understood that the family's behavior was a form of emotional warfare, and she intended to meet it with the unyielding force of the law. Within 48 hours, she had drafted 2 documents. The first was a formal eviction notice, citing Chloe as an illegal occupant. The second was a temporary restraining order, prohibiting his parents and his sister from entering the property, changing the locks, or contacting Liam with the intent to harass him. "This will feel aggressive," Ms. Albright had warned him, her gaze steady. "They will react poorly. They will try to make you feel guilty. Your only job is to stand firm and let the documents do the talking. Can you do that?" Liam nodded, his jaw tight with resolve. The man who had entered her office just days earlier, hunched and defeated, was gone. In his place was someone who was beginning to understand that self-respect was not selfishness. The documents were served by a neutral third party, a process server who delivered the crisp, legal envelopes into his mother's hands as she watered her petunias. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Liam's phone began to ring incessantly. He ignored the calls, just as Ms. Albright had instructed, letting them go to voicemail. The messages were a torrent of escalating emotion. First came Chloe's tearful plea, full of accusations. "How could you do this to me, Liam? To your own sister? I have nowhere to go. You're throwing me out on the street." Then came his mother's voice, trembling with righteous fury. "A restraining order? Against your own mother and father? After everything we've done for you? This is shameful, Liam. You have brought shame on this family. We raised you better than this." The final message was from his father. It was short, cold, and dripping with contempt. "You've made your choice. Don't come crawling back to us when you're all alone in that empty house of yours. You're no son of mine." Each message was a carefully crafted missile designed to find his weakest points, his guilt, his loyalty, his fear of being alone. He listened to them once, then deleted them. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done. The day Chloe was legally required to vacate the premises arrived. Liam drove to his house with Ms. Albright, who had insisted on being present. They found his entire family on the front lawn, a united front of condemnation. His father stood with his arms crossed, his face a thunderous mask. His mother was weeping softly into a handkerchief. And Chloe was directing 2 movers who were loading her boxes into a van, her face a mixture of defiance and self-pity. She looked at Liam with pure venom in her eyes. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "Sitting all alone in your precious house. You won." Liam didn't feel like he had won. He felt hollowed out, exhausted. But as he looked at them, standing there expecting him to break, to apologize, to reverse everything, he felt a strange new strength solidify within him. It was the strength of a boundary, clear and absolute. He was no longer a resource to be plundered. He was a man with a door, and he finally had the key. The climax of the drama unfolded right there on the manicured lawn that Liam himself had seeded and tended. As the last of Chloe's boxes was loaded into the van, his father took a step forward, his shadow falling over Liam. His voice was low and menacing, intended for Liam alone. "You think this piece of paper from some cheap lawyer makes you a big man?" he snarled, gesturing toward Ms. Albright, who stood calmly a few feet away. "You're nothing without this family. We gave you everything." Before Liam could even process the words, Ms. Albright stepped forward, her presence radiating an authority that had nothing to do with physical size. "On the contrary, Mr. Henderson," she stated, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Your son built his life with his own 2 hands. I have seen the receipts. I have seen the bank statements. I have seen the proof of his labor. The only thing you seem to have given him is a crushing sense of obligation, which he has now, quite rightly, decided to set down." His mother let out a wail. "How can you be so cruel, Liam? She's your sister. You're supposed to protect her." This was the moment. The final test. Years of conditioning screamed at Liam to back down, to comfort his mother, to make peace at any cost. He could feel the immense weight of their collective disappointment pressing down on him. He looked at his sister, who was watching him with a glimmer of hope, believing his resolve would crumble as it always had. He looked at his parents, their faces etched with the certainty of their own righteousness. And then he looked at his house, the solid, tangible proof of his own life, his own efforts, his own dreams. He found his voice, and when it came out, it was clear and steady, devoid of the anger and hurt that had churned inside him for weeks. "I do love you," he said, and he meant it. He looked each of them in the eye. "I love all of you. But loving you does not mean I have to erase myself. My home is not a community resource. My savings are not a family emergency fund. And my future is not your backup plan." He took a deep breath, the words flowing from a place of newfound certainty. "I will always be your son, and I will always be your brother. But I will not be your doormat. This," he said, gesturing to the house behind him, "is where my life begins. You are welcome in it, but only if you are willing to knock first and respect the person who answers." A stunned silence fell over the lawn. They had no response. Their usual weapons, guilt, shame, anger, were useless against the simple, unshakable power of his truth. Chloe got into the van without another word. His mother, her tears suddenly silent, was led to the car by his father, who cast one last, unreadable look at Liam before driving away. The battle was over. As the family car disappeared down the street, a profound quiet settled over the property. It wasn't the empty silence of loneliness that his father had predicted, it was the sound of peace. Ms. Albright placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Liam," she said softly. "You chose yourself." Liam looked at her, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. He then turned and walked toward his front door. He put his own key into the new lock she'd had installed for him. It turned smoothly, and as the door clicked open, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of coming home. In the weeks and months that followed, Liam's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. The initial silence from his family was deafening, a void where constant demands and passive-aggressive comments used to be. At first, it felt like loneliness. He would sit in his quiet house, the silence amplifying the ghost of the argument on the lawn. But slowly, imperceptibly, the silence transformed. It became peace. It became freedom. He started working on projects for himself again, not just maintaining the house, but improving it for his own joy. He built the bookshelf he'd always wanted in the living room, staining the wood to a deep cherry finish. He finally planted the vegetable garden he'd been planning for years, his hands in the soil feeling like a reclamation of his own time and energy. The spare room, once the source of so much conflict, became his office, a space dedicated to his own plans and his own future. He reconnected with old friends his family had never approved of, friends who saw him as Liam, not as a means to an end. He went fishing, he took a weekend trip to the mountains, he did small things that were entirely and unapologetically for him. He was discovering the person he was when he wasn't playing a role for someone else. About 3 months later, he received a letter. It was from his mother. His first instinct was to throw it away, to protect the fragile peace he had built. But curiosity won. With trembling hands, he opened it. The letter wasn't an apology, not in the way he might have hoped. There were no grand admissions of guilt. Instead, it was filled with mundane news about their lives, followed by a short, simple sentence that struck him to his core: "The house is very quiet without you coming over for dinner. We miss you." It wasn't everything, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of their pride, a tentative hand extended across the chasm he had been forced to create. A week later, he got a text from Chloe. "Hey. Landed a new job. It's pretty good. Just thought you'd want to know." Liam realized that by forcing them away, he had inadvertently forced them to stand on their own 2 feet. His sister was finding her own way, not because he had abandoned her, but because he had refused to enable her. The boundary he had drawn wasn't a wall to keep them out forever, it was a lesson in mutual respect. He hadn't destroyed his family. He had given it the only chance it had to become a healthy one. He knew the road back would be long and complicated, but for the first time, it felt like a road worth traveling, because he would be walking it as an equal, not as a servant. The story of Liam isn't just about a house and a set of keys. It's about the architecture of self-respect. We are all born into roles: the responsible one, the funny one, the troubled one, the smart one. And sometimes, those roles become cages. Liam's family didn't see him, they saw his function. They saw a son and a brother whose purpose was to serve the collective, and they believed their love entitled them to his life. His journey wasn't about abandoning his family, but about teaching them how to love him correctly. He had to become the villain in their story so he could become the hero of his own. He learned that true strength isn't about how much you can carry for others, it's about knowing what you are not willing to bear. He discovered that the most sacred space you will ever own is the boundary you draw around your own well-being. His house became a home again only when he declared that its foundation was his own self-worth, a foundation that was not for sale and could not be borrowed. The quiet that he once feared became the canvas on which he painted a new life, one of his own design. His action sent ripples through his entire family dynamic. His sister, forced to rely on herself, found a strength she never knew she possessed. His parents, faced with the consequences of their entitlement, began the slow, difficult process of seeing their son as a man, not an extension of themselves. The fractured relationship didn't heal overnight, but it began to mend on a foundation of honesty and respect, something that had been missing for years. Liam's new key didn't just open a door, it unlocked a future where his love for his family and his love for himself could finally coexist. So I ask you again, have you ever been the one everyone depends on? Remember Liam's story. Remember that your life is not a public utility. Your dreams are not deferrable. Your home, whether it's a physical place or the quiet space inside your own heart, belongs to you. Setting a boundary is not an act of aggression, it is an act of profound self-love. It is the moment you teach the world how you deserve to be treated. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their key belongs to them and them alone. Comment below if you've ever had to draw a difficult line in the sand. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can ever do is turn the lock on a door and, in the ensuing silence, finally hear ourselves think.